Okay, this is the intro to the recording for the Sabbath service, AM to the U.S., PM to the U.K. for the 17th day of February 2018. We'll do the Hebrew date when I go live. We're going live on Sabbath.tv and up on the Sabbath service page on Facebook Live. Let's start with the Sabbath.tv. Good morning. Welcome to those of you watching on Sabbath.tv for the AM service to the U.S., PM service to the U.K. for the 17th day of February. I'm going to give the date, 2018, give the date in a moment again as soon as I go live on Facebook Live. Let me reach over and get that on. And greetings to those of you watching on Facebook Live. I was just doing the intro on Sabbath.tv for the AM service to the U.S., the PM service to the U.K. for this 17th day of February 2018 on the pagan Roman calendar. It's still the second day of the 12th month on the Hebrew calendar. I say still because Friday night Bible study last night, we announced the date on the Roman calendar as February 16, 2018, which it was until midnight last night on that calendar made by man. But on the calendar made by God, beginning at sunset last night, it became the Sabbath, and on the Hebrew calendar, it became the second day of the 12th month. And as I was explaining last night, that means we're less than a month away now to the first day of the year, on a new month, on the first day of the month, and then 14 days into that month, just after sunset, the Passover memorial. So we're a little bit less than 6 weeks away from the next feast day, the Passover memorial service. Just to keep you mindful where we are time-wise. Good morning. This morning I promised we would read an article on why more earthquakes. And, as you think of the term earthquake, since Jesus Christ used the word seismos in the Greek, think of all other kinds of seismic activity. Tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, wildfires, floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, typhoons, all of that kind of thing is commotions in the air, commotions on the ground are definitions of seismos, seismic activity on the earth. But there is a huge earthquake coming at a certain point in time, and perhaps this article I'm going to cold read in a few minutes that I promised I'd read last night will cover that. Yesterday, the reason we're on that is because yesterday a huge earthquake occurred in Mexico. Let me bring this map forward and get our buttons to work here. Here's a map showing the state in Mexico, Oaxaca, in which let's see if we can get that little pointer, move that pointer out of the way. Okay, showing the city where the earthquake from almost 25 kilometers below the earth had its axis, its center point, in Pinotepa del Don Luis, which is a city in Oaxaca, Mexico, a little bit south, 200 and some odd kilometers south of Mexico City, almost 200 miles from Mexico City, but Mexico City felt it strongly because it was a 7.2 magnitude quake from deep underground, and Mexico City has very soft soil. It makes them especially feel the earthquakes. And Mexico sits on 3 large tectonic plates, which makes it very susceptible to earthquakes. The Pacific plate, the Cocos plate, and there's one other large plate there. But let me come back with you, and we're going to, before we, let's do this. To wake us up, let me switch something on this screen. Let's back that up, and I've got some new hymns that I put scrolling text with, or some new videos, I should say, where I've put scrolling text in a way that makes it easy to read, and I'd like to not only test them out, but give us an opportunity to open up this morning's service with a couple or three hymns and see how they do too, and see how, if you have any comments about how I could improve them, well, I'd appreciate you let me know privately, or it doesn't matter. Just tell me what you think, and I'll appreciate it. If there's some improvement I can do to it. Now, if you just flat don't like it for some reason and you don't have a suggestion for an improvement, well, maybe just tell me that privately. But let's do the first one from Psalm 5. It's page 4 in the purple hymnal, if you have a purple hymnal. If you have one of the blue ones, which I do, I still have a blue one, and they're, you just go to the pages that match up with the purple hymnal. It's got the words there, but we've got them on screen for you too. Page 25 if you got a blue book, 28 if you got the old original gray hymnal, page 4 in the purple hymnal. And this hymn, written by Dwight Armstrong, God's End-Time Apostle's brother, Dwight Armstrong, whom God's End-Time Apostle had commissioned to do the hymns from the Psalms, and he did an outstanding job, I think, and I think a lot of you do too. And if some of you are kind of newer in the church or haven't sung these hymns for a while, I think it'd be good for us to get back to them, and I think you might agree. These are outstandingly done, putting the lyrics of the Psalms to music, as Dwight Armstrong seemed to be very blessed with a skill to do, even though he humbly sometimes said he thought he didn't do that hot. But a lot of us brethren say, hey, he did outstanding, especially as people talented on the piano like Russ Judson was able to really spruce up the notes and play them in a way as some other good pianists can do, and add sparkle to the hymns. So let's go to this one, get the lower third out of the way, and let's all sing together. The young ambassador chorale accompanies on this, so I'm just going to turn off my mic, let you sing along with the chorale as we together sing, "Give ear unto my prayer, give ear unto my words, O Lord," from Psalm 5. Lead me by thy grace, and verse 4. Thanks for joining in and singing along. I hope you did. You maybe heard me in the background a little bit singing along too, and that was kind of a good way to start this Sabbath morning. And I'm redoing all of these, and I think you'll see I've got the letters nice and big. I've got them coming up, plenty of time for you to see them. And my first 2 years in college, and even before I came out to the college, I worked at 3 different television stations, so I have a little background in television type things. And my first 2 years in college, I worked at the Ambassador College television production studios where Mr. Armstrong's programs were produced, of course, and that's all we did there, those television programs and the 30-second promotions and the 10-second slides we'd put together, which I had a big part in causing to happen. I've told you about that before, but so I'm working these the hymns into some big type, scrolling up, plenty of time for you to see the words before you have to sing them. And let's see how this one came out. I've got another one here from Psalm 4. Trust in God and stand in awe. This one, page 3, if you're using a purple hymnal, 24 on the blue hymnal. It's not in the gray. This was added when the purple hymnal came out as page 3. And again, chorale accompaniment. Let's all sing along together. Trust in God and stand in awe from Psalm 4. Hear and answer when I call, O righteous God. From distress you set me free. Hear now my prayer. Have never vanity, falsehood they see, turning glory to shame. They are misled. Verse 2. Know that God has set apart all godly men. Everybody on verse 3 now. Safely in peace. All right, brethren, thanks for singing along again. Let's do one more. Let's go up to the first one in the purple hymnal, page 1, Psalm 1, from Psalm 1. Oh, that we could all do this one. Blessed and happy is the man who never walks astray. Psalm 1. Everybody together. and happy is the man who doth never walk astray, nor with the ungodly man stands in sinners' way. All he does prospers well, but the wicked are not so. They are chaff before the wind, driven to and fro. Verse 2 now. Ne'er in scorner's chair he sits, for he places his delight in God's law and meditates on it day and night. All he does prospers well, but the wicked are not so. They are chaff before the wind, driven to and fro. Verse 3, everybody now. He shall be a tree that grows, planted by the riverside, which in season yields its fruit, green its leaves. Everybody on the chorus. All he does prospers well, but the wicked are not so. They are chaff before the wind, driven to and fro. All right, there we are. Three hymns for this morning. That last one is a favorite of Kathleen Cat Williams over in a certain nursing home that we've been barred by some family member from being able to see. I say we, church members, are not allowed to see her. She's not allowed to have her Sabbath service inside the facility anymore. And with her longtime minister, that's one of her longtime ministers, that's very sad. And hopefully some of you are praying about that God will work to turn that around or find some kind of relief on that situation. An intervention. And we're doing what we can on our end of it here. All right, brethren, I told you last night, let me put that slide from the earthquake back on screen from yesterday in Mexico. You know, on September 19, they had a previous earthquake that killed a couple of hundred people. And there's a lot of damage, and everything's not in yet. We'll be covering that more fully tomorrow night on World Watch about the earthquakes. But I've got an article that I dug out from 1961 that covers this subject. Let's see if I can find the button to bring that on screen. I think we can bring it on screen here. That asks and answers these questions. Why more earthquakes are coming and where? What causes them? What is prophesied about future earthquakes? Now again, this article was written in 1961, and I'm not going to mention the author's name because I will tell you this. He was disfellowshipped in 1974. However, he was well trained under Mr. Armstrong and was able to write up and carry the ideas and teachings that Mr. Armstrong gave us from the Bible, with Mr. Armstrong being very inspired. He was a man God called for a purpose, to use, to announce, to be the agent by which God called the rest of us. And we are told in Revelation 3, verse 3, to remember by and through whom we learn these things. But let's read this. I'm going to cold read it. I found it right after I saw news of the earthquake yesterday and just kind of scanned it a little bit. I haven't really read through it. I just had time to pull it up, and then last night we didn't get to it, so this morning came very early for me and to get on. Timely this morning, more or less timely. I just threw the switches and here we're on. Scientists are being shaken by new, sobering, almost unbelievable facts concerning earthquakes. Now remember, this was written in 1961, but still a lot of this is going to apply today. Recent knowledge has come to light that revolutionizes all previous concepts. These awesome new concepts reveal a threat to human existence that rivals the hydrogen bomb. Now, you know the hydrogen bomb was invented, created, tested in 1955, in August 1955. And that's something that happened in these latter days, something we never had before. But back to the article, something big and ominous is building up deep within the earth. The sudden increase in earth tremors, both in frequency and magnitude, has become a point of growing concern. What science has discovered, Dr. Perry Beverly, formerly professor of seismology at the University of California, recently stated, "Something worldwide is going on, but it's hard to say just what it is. We don't know what, but great forces are at work in relative patterns, trying to pull our continents in one direction or another. This is due to something below, a great strain that is accumulating." Graphic testimony of this growing concern is evidenced by what occurred in Chile in South America. Striking suddenly out of the gray dawn, never before, striking suddenly out of the gray dawn of Saturday, May 21st, 1960, erupted the most devastating and catastrophic series of earthquakes ever recorded on Earth up to that time. Within hours, an area as large as the state of New York, as large as all England, was completely destroyed. 4,000 persons lay dead. Another 1,000 lay dying, their plaintive cries for aid going unheeded in the twisting chaos about them. Thousands of other injured were trapped beneath the growing wreckage of collapsed buildings, bricks, and mortar dust. This was Concepcion, third largest city in Chile. Here and in other major cities in the narrow 2,000-mile-long country began a 10-day era of terror and a series of events that defy the imagination. When the first huge tremor shook Concepcion, large industrial hub of the country, 30% of the city's buildings collapsed. Hundreds of factory workers and residents poured into the streets. By evening, 138 dead were counted and thousands were praying in the streets that the worst had passed. By noon the following day, courage and hope returned, and the majority of the populace began picking its way around the rubble. At 3:05 p.m., the ground again heaved, and 9 minutes later, at 3:14 p.m., the mightiest earthquake ever recorded on seismographic equipment shook the Pacific strand of Chile like a rag doll. High in the Andes, the devastating tremors triggered mountain slides and avalanches, burying entire villages, highways, and railroads. Rivers dammed by rock slides flooded other helpless hamlets. In the Gulfs of Corcovado and Ancud, whole islands disappeared beneath the sea, while other new sections of earth thrust up above the swirling waters, creating new islands. New volcanoes were suddenly born, adding their spewing red-hot lava and smoke to several old volcanoes suddenly come to life. In stark terror, thousands of eyewitnesses saw an entire 25-mile strip of coastline suddenly sink 1,000 feet. The whole face of the land was changed. People by the hundreds fell in terror, unable to move from sheer fear and from the violence of the writhing earth. It seemed like the end of the world. Geologic history. In the 10-day series of over 100 earthquakes, 12 tremors exceeded the intensity of 6 on the intensity of 6, magnitude 6 on the Richter scale. 6 is classified as a major earthquake. The cataclysmic shock of May 22nd reached 9.2 on the scale, the strongest earthquake ever recorded on modern seismographs. The tremendous violence of the upthrusting earth sent giant seismic waves hurtling across the Pacific Ocean as fast as 520 miles per hour. Tremendous havoc and destruction came to coastal cities as far as 10,000 miles away. Damage running into the millions of dollars was recorded in Hawaii, Japan, Okinawa, Alaska, New Zealand, Australia, and the Philippine Islands. These recent catastrophic earthquakes and the resultant seismic ocean waves that occurred in Chile have made geologic history. Now remember, this article was written in 1961, and going on with it, it says, "Never before has modern man been witness to earthquakes of such catastrophic proportions. Seismologists and scientists have had to revise their concept of the destructive capacity of earthquakes." And friends, this began during these latter days, so that we can understand, there's a time of the worst time of trouble on the face of the earth that's prophesied yet to come. And what was being talked about in this 1961 article is just the beginning of sorrows. And the article goes on to ask this question: what does it all mean? Are these earthquakes a symptom of things to come? The article asks, and answers and responds, we must know. Now here's a summary in 1961 of then recent major earthquakes worldwide. The following summary of major earthquakes in 1961 with accompanying chart dramatically demonstrates the reason for alarm among scientists and seismologists. Note the worldwide distribution of these major quakes. 1. Chile, May 1960, area the size of New York State, destroyed, $600 million damage, over 5,000 dead, 450,000 homeless, another 150,000 homes badly damaged. One tremor at 9.2 on Richter scale was 2. Number 2, Agadir, Morocco, February 29, 1960, 12,000 dead. City wrecked by 2 earthquakes and a tidal wave. Number 3, Iran, April 24, 1960, between 1,500 and 3,000 dead as the city of Lar and neighboring village of Garash were completely destroyed. 2 huge tremors reduced Laroa, billowing cloud of dust, as one observer commented. Another said, "This is the worst scene of disaster and devastation I've ever seen." Number 4, Algeria, February 21, 1960, 46 dead. Number 5, Peru, January 13, 1960, 60 dead. Mexico, now this is going back in 1961, Mexico. Number 6, an alarming increase in earthquakes noted in Mexico City area, over 40 during first half of August 1959 alone. Residents of Loma Bonita fled into the streets and fell to their knees in prayer. Number 7, Formosa, August 16, 1959. Violinaire, 40-minute earthquake left 14 dead, many buildings destroyed, and dam aged in Himchung area, and damaged. There's a hyphen in there that shouldn't be there. Buildings destroyed and damaged in Himchung area. Number 8, Solomon Islands, August 19, 1959. Tremors shook island of Vela La Vela. Every 8 minutes for 8 hours. tumbling brick and concrete buildings, leaving natives in a state of constant panic. Number 9, Greece, January 8, 1959. An earthquake of extreme violence was reported around Rhodes or other Greek islands. Number 10, Mongolia, January 23, 1958. Moscow, record earthquake topples mountains in remote Mongolia. One of the worst earthquakes ever recorded has rumpled the Earth's surface in a remote part of Mongolia, splitting open huge chasms and toppling mountain peaks in a primeval display of natural force. Existing rivers were jerked into new courses, and completely new rivers, 8 miles long, were created. Dense clouds of dust billowing above the mountains to a height of 4,500 feet could be seen as far as 40 miles away. Some peaks cracked and half crumbled, and scars formed with a steep drop of hundreds of yards. The center of the earthquake is marked by a fissure more than 150 miles long and up to 70 feet wide. Number 11, Japan, November 7, 1958. Tremor equal to Tokyo quake of 1923. 12, Montana, USA, August 17, 1959. Disaster struck near Yellowstone National Park, the largest quake in U.S. during present century, excluding Nevada and California quakes. 13, Tennessee, USA, December 1959. Sharpest quake in western Tennessee in 20 years. 14, Georgia and South Carolina. I'm just going to scoot through these, friends, because we're looking back at 1961. There have been many, many, many more quakes since then, but 15, Northern California, 16, Alaska. I'm going to let it scroll if you want to eyeball through it. For those of you who have video, those of you listening via podcast, I'm just going to scoot on through this up to this point. 3 Mile High ice-capped mountains danced. Waters of a small bay were thrown 1,800 feet up a mountainside in a titanic deluge. Listen to the hugeness of what these earthquakes can do, and they're going to get worse. Christ said things will progress. They'll become progressively worse than what we were seeing mentioned in this article from 1969. Ships were thrown 15 feet or more out of the water. Over an area of 150 square miles, the soil boiled in sand craters and there were great landslides. It might well have been one of the major catastrophes of history, except that it was in a very sparsely inhabited area. No wonder scientists are concerned. Something big is brewing. But not even the scientists realize how big. These recent reports herald only the beginning. What's ahead concerns you and your family's future. This is where this article, keys us into something that, even though this was written in 1961, these points apply today. What's ahead should concern you and your family, because it's going to affect your future. Almost daily, the news wires are carrying a story of a seismic disturbance somewhere on Earth. And it mentions here Elliot B. Roberts, member of the Coast Geodetic Survey in California, reports that if every earthquake were counted, from the slightest to the major quakes, nearly 1 million earthquakes are now occurring annually. And this was back in, again, this article written in 1961. Going on with the article, no matter how awesome the destructive power of the hydrogen bomb, it is dwarfed into insignificance compared to the destructive capacity of earthquakes. It would take the combined force of 25,000 atomic bombs of the Hiroshima class, atomic bombs now, of the Hiroshima class, to begin to release the equivalent energy of only one of the major shocks in the recent Chilean disaster, recent to 1961. They're getting worse. No area on Earth immune. Although the majority of earthquakes take place along known seismic belts, no area on Earth is immune to catastrophic tremors. As a recent report has brought to light, great earthquakes occasionally occur outside the main trouble zones. In the United States, for example, a great earthquake occurred in New Madrid in southeastern Missouri, an area not popularly considered earthquake-prone. This earthquake was felt over 2/3 of the United States. From an article in the Dallas Times-Herald, August 23, 1959. Seismologist Leonard Murphy of the Coast and Geodetic Survey recently stated, "We've been lucky in the United States in that few earthquakes have occurred in major, heavily populated cities. However, with recent knowledge of earthquake potential brought to light by investigations during the International Geophysical Year, no area on Earth may be considered outside an earthquake zone. As one noted seismologist recently stated it, the farther you are from the last major quake, the nearer you are to the next." What causes an earthquake, this article asks, and answers, ancient peoples once believed that the earth was supported by the back of a huge legendary beast. Whenever the earth convulsed, they believed it to be the movements of this great beast. As man's wisdom increased, he's come to learn more of the earth beneath his feet. Scientists now know that deep within the earth, tremendous forces are at work. These forces are part of the primary law that keeps this earth in balance, part of the basic law that was planned and built into this earth when it was created. Scientists realize there is much that they don't know yet nor understand about these great forces constantly in motion beneath the surface of the earth, yet they are aware of their awesome potential when they examine the breathtaking flaws and distortions that have occurred on the surface as a result of these forces in action. The mighty Rocky Mountains of the middle western United States, the towering Swiss Alps, and the lofty South American Andes give mute testimony of the power of these mysterious subterranean forces. These internal forces are part of the primary law that keeps this earth in balance. These expansional and contractional movements that are constantly taking place within the earth have their resultant effect upon the skin or crust of the earth. As a result, there must be a giving and taking to compensate for these tremendous subterranean forces. And brethren, pardon me just a moment. I'm going to just pause and grab just a little sip of water. And then go on with the article from 1961. The Earth's crust, therefore, is a moving, almost living thing, creased and cracked to allow for the constant moving and shifting that must occur. Suppose the rectangle in Figure A, illustrated in the accompanying diagram, I don't think we have that here, but just imagine it if you can. A rectangle represents a large tract of land, perhaps several hundred miles across, and that the weakest rocks lie along the line it calls AB here. Imagine that the dotted lines are very long, straight fences built across it. If the block is slowly strained by forces working on the landmass in different directions, it will be deformed, so the fence is moved to the positions shown in B. Well, I wish we had that diagram. But it goes on and says, all the time this is going on, and the process is very slow, elastic energy is being stored up, just as when a spring is wound. Eventually, the strain may become so great that the weaker rocks can no longer resist. Suddenly, they break, and the stored up elastic energy is released as the Earth's crust shifts to a new position, just as if the coiled spring were suddenly let go. The rocks along the line of weakness move until they take up a new unstrained position. The waves of energy set up by this sudden movement or release of tremendous areas of land we call an earthquake. This movement and stress pattern may occur horizontally, vertically, or a combination of the two, according to the direction of the strain upon the land masses. Earthquake faults is the subtitle of this next section. In recent years, and again, remember now, if you just tuned in, and this I'm reading from an article from 1961 on earthquakes. In years recent to 1961, seismologists and scientists have come to astounding new knowledge concerning the origin of earthquakes and earthquake potential on this earth. In their studies, they have encountered new potentials that stagger the imagination. Just over 50 years ago, at the time of the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, scientists were aware that certain earthquake cracks were associated with movements of the Earth's crust. At this time, less than 60 years ago, should have been a space there between time and less. At this time, less than 60 years ago, scientists believed that these cracks in the earth were the byproduct of earth tremors, but had nothing to do with their cause. San Franciscans, people from San Francisco back in 1906, knew of the earthquake crack and referred to it as the Great Fissure. Other earthquake cracks had been observed in different places along the Pacific coast, but had never been associated in any way with each other. Soon after 1906 and the San Francisco disaster, serious investigations began into these isolated earthquake cracks. It was at this time that the startling truth was learned that these isolated faults were all part of one tremendous, gargantuan fault system. It was to this particular vast fault, running visibly on the surface of the land for over 700 miles and stretching from the Gulf of California to a point well above San Francisco, that scientists gave the name San Andreas Fault Line. Intensive studies of similar fault systems have revealed to scientists and seismologists that the entire surface of our Earth is cracked and creased by these tremendous cracks and deformities. Startling new facts have come to light as a result of exhaustive and intensive scientific research made during the International Geophysical Year of 1957. Charting and scrutinizing the hidden depths of previously unknown ocean floors, scientists have discovered additional breathtaking flaws in the Earth's crust. Beneath the waters of the mid-Atlantic lies the newly discovered Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a spectacular rift tracing its serpentine course from Antarctica in the south through the Atlantic and all the way to the North Pole. This breathtaking ridge continues, in fact, beyond the North Pole on into the Pacific and around the world. Probing the mysteries of this phenomenon, scientists have discovered a huge crack or fault running along the crest of this ridge in places miles wide. In similar studies in the Pacific, giant fractures trace their way unseen beneath the sea, moot evidence of the tremendous forces lying below. There's more, but brethren, I need just a quick sip of water. Let me turn off my mic and clear my throat. for just a moment. I'll be right back. Okay, we'll go on to this next section entitled Terrible Potential. In studying these fault systems, scientists have had to come to an entirely new concept in earthquake potential. With the startling new knowledge of the immensity and magnitude of the tremendous fault systems that trace themselves through this earth, seismologists and geologists must face the reality that huge fault lines mean huge earthquakes. Never before have scientists been able to understand the world around us as they do today. The International Geophysical Year of 1957 has revealed more knowledge about this globe we live on than mankind has been able to learn in all the centuries that have gone before. And what this article is bringing out, brethren, let me just come back with you for a moment here. What this article is bringing out is the fact that knowledge has increased in these latter days. Well, let me restate that. What this is bringing out, that the increased knowledge we have now is proving and showing that we are in the last days spoken of by Daniel, in the book of Daniel, that in the latter days, in the last days before Christ's return, knowledge would be increased, and the other thing he says is that men would be able to run to and fro. All right, I'm going to bring the slide back on the screen, and I'm going to reach back behind me and see if I have another bottle of water. Yeah, I do, because this long read, I'm going to need just a little bit more water. But that last paragraph, take a look at it if you're watching video. Never before have scientists been able to understand the world around us the way we do today. And this establishing that knowledge has been increased, and as Daniel said, that would happen. Knowledge would be increased only in the last days. And so this helps us understand we are in those last days when prophecies are going to be increasing in frequency and increasing in magnitude, just like these earthquakes. That also means the other things of prophecy, the other things of the first four seals. Increase in religious deception, increase in war and rumors of war, increase in famines and disease epidemics and other troubles of all kind, including seismic activity, which is part and parcel of the fourth seal, and trouble, just general trouble that leads up to the mega trouble of the fifth seal. The time of trouble so great, Christ referred to it as mega trouble, and the King James renders that as great tribulation, with Christ saying it's the time that's coming, and this great tribulation, this mega trouble ahead of us, is a time of trouble so great that no time since the beginning of the world has ever been as bad as what's coming, known or ever after. Going back to the article now, just as scientists less than 60 years ago from when this article was written in 1960, back before 1906, did not associate the isolated fissures near San Francisco, California, with one tremendous fault system over 700 miles long. Just as they didn't do that, scientists of just a decade ago, back in the 1950s, from the time this article was written, did not realize how intricately this earth is cracked into a maze or network of related fault systems. In the last few years, especially with the recent investigations of the IGY, the International Geological, whatever that Y stood for, I forgot, the staggering truth has been realized. No earthquake on Earth can be considered an isolated occurrence, but rather the stretching of one muscle in the breathtaking gargantuan fault system that one day may break loose into the most fantastic geology display ever witnessed by man. Yes, the shocking reality scientists must now face is the potential of worldwide earthquakes. Lee F. Noble, an alumnus of Yale University, has demonstrated this hugeness in earthquake potential that staggers the imagination. While studying strata distortion along the San Andreas fault line in California, Noble was amazed to discover a 40-mile separation between two imposing mountain ranges. He has demonstrated that the 10,000-foot San Gabriel Range and the equally imposing San Bernardino Range were once one range, created by a tremendous upthrust along the San Andreas fault line in the past. Having created this range, the San Andreas fault line has subsequently torn it apart, dragging the two halves where they now stand today better than 40 miles apart. Where slippages along fault lines were once thought of in terms of feet, they now must be understood in terms of miles. The intensity of an earthquake is generally determined by the extent of displacement or slippage along a fault line. The amount of slip that produced the devastating San Francisco earthquake in 1906 was apparently only 21 feet. Can it begin to enter our imagination the ferocity and scope of an earthquake where a slippage along a fault line of perhaps 1 mile or more should take place? No structure in the area could be left standing. The whole face of the land would be changed. No wonder scientists have said the San Andreas fault line has the destructive potential of 1 million atomic bombs. This process of fracture and displacement is known to the geologist as faulting. Faults are the result of a subterranean compressional, tensional, or shearing forces. The displacement of the strata may be different depending upon the type of force being exerted below. Almost every conceivable earth movement is possible, as is demonstrated in the accompanying diagrams. We don't have those diagrams, I'm sorry. The earthquakes that recently devastated the Chilean coastline are graphic evidence of the destructive potential that we live with daily on this earth. Earthquakes of this magnitude can occur. Scientists now realize the awesome fragility of the paper-thin shell we call the Earth's crust, upon which we live. Not so solid Earth, perhaps a clearer concept of the fragility of the Earth's crust, will serve to demonstrate the precarious position we live in daily. We have come to look upon our Earth as quite solid and substantial. However, when we scrutinize its construction more closely, we are in for a shock. Now again, I don't have a diagram here. Let's pick up at this point. The inner core is probably composed of an ultra-dense metallic material superheated under tremendous pressure. The outer core is similar in composition, probably of metallic iron. It's in a molten superheated condition since it does not transmit certain seismic vibrations. The mantle of the Earth is composed of very dense rock, more dense than any we know of on the surface. The temperature of the mantle below the Earth's crust is several thousand degrees centigrade. Yet, this ultra-dense or basic rock remains a semi-solid due to the tremendous pressure. Nevertheless, whenever that pressure is released, it spews forth in white-hot superheated emissions known as volcanic eruptions. Think of the tremendous pressure and potential force contained within the paper-thin shell of the Earth's crust. The Earth is 4,000 miles thick down to the center of the core. Yet the crust that encloses it all, is only from 6 to 40 miles thick. Comparing our Earth to an apple, the apple's skin is several times thicker in comparison to the thickness of the Earth's crust in relation to the Earth. Perhaps now we can understand why the crust of the Earth is not so solid after all, but entirely subject to the staggering power lying only skin deep below our feet. What about the future? Should we be alarmed about the future? Are earthquakes going to continue to increase in frequency and intensity? Our scientists tell us something is brewing. We need to know. We need to know. Down through the centuries, God has warned man of his sinful and disobedient ways. God has sent his prophets in every age to warn man of the fruits of his disobedience. Man has rejected these warnings, and now at the end of nearly 6,000 years, Almighty God is sending one last final warning to the world as a witness before he executes his judgment upon a godless and lawless world. That last warning of the coming rule of God over man is now booming around the world, just as Jesus Christ prophesied, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness, and then shall the end come. That warning is being fulfilled through the World Tomorrow program circling the globe with over 12 million watts of power each week and through the pages of the Plain Truth magazine. Now let me come out for a moment because, as many of you listening to this know, the last thing mentioned, the Plain Truth magazine is no longer being published, and the World Tomorrow program is no longer producing new programs and being aired. Put our date up on the screen for just a moment while I'm on the screen with you. However, God has preserved just about every one of those Plain Truth magazines that were printed before Mr. Armstrong died, and he's preserved hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of radio broadcast, telecast, Bible studies, sermons by God's end-time apostle. And even though God's end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong is in the grave, with all of his writings and much of his speaking preserved, well, I should say maybe not all of his writing, but so much of his writings and so much of his speaking preserved in publications and recordings, that it's as if the man were able to speak from the grave. It's as if God were able to speak through the man from the grave. And God has opened up a new door that didn't even exist while Mr. Armstrong was alive, inside of which that door, God has used it to preserve as part of the preservation of the writings and speakings of his end-time apostle Herbert W. Armstrong. And that's why I'm going to try to read more and play more of the recordings of Mr. Armstrong speaking as we continue to go on Sabbath.tv, and I even want to work Mr. Armstrong's voice more and more into the nightly news programs, even though a lot of the news programs are from news clips that we play under license from the BBC, one of the world's best news gathering sources, and with plenty of people out there, so that if you wind up with one reporter who's maybe a little biased, they're not supposed to be under the BBC rules, but if, let's say, you do get one reporter that reflects a little bias, there are plenty of other reporters covering the same story that I can pick and choose from and pick the least of any bias, where him man who doesn't understand the Bible and God's prophecies they've got a certain bias just from their lack of understanding, of course. But we who do understand it, and having many sources from within the same organization covering stories, it helps you. That's one of the rules that Mr. Hogberg in the news agency the news bureau that Mr. Armstrong set up under him when he was alive, to be able to get news from around the world and know that it's not fake news, because you're getting it from multiple sources that are reporting it quickly after it happens. And it's not news in that sense, it's olds, as Mr. Armstrong used to like to put it, but you're getting it soon after it happens from multiple sources, and with different reporters and saying it in a different way. And that's one of the ways you can, if you just get it from one source only, and don't see others, you can wonder about it. But when you get it from multiple sources, quickly coming from different different sources from whose headquarters are from different areas, then that adds veracity to it. Let's go on with this article. When Almighty God is through warning mankind verbally, He's going to speak in a language that man will heed and understand. God is going to bring down vengeance upon a disobedient and lawless man. Notice the judgment that the Creator God passes upon disobedient and rebellious peoples. Enter into the rock and hide you in the dust for fear of the Eternal and for the glory of His majesty. The lofty looks of man shall be humbled, and the haughtiness of man shall be bowed down, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day, a day coming in the day of the Lord, after 2.5 years of Satan's and man's wrath being poured out in the Great Tribulation, part of the 5th seal. In the 7th seal, year-long day of the Lord, this wrath of God that's being spoken of here will be poured out. That's just ahead of us. Those 2.5 years of Great Tribulation could begin any moment. The stage is set for a dictator, an emperor, to be named by a United States of Europe. It doesn't have to mean that Britain will be fully exited by the time the beast comes on the scene. That could happen before Britain gets fully out. Going on now with this about the day of the Lord. For the day of the Lord, that's the 7th seal. For the day of the Lord of hosts shall be upon everyone that is proud and lofty, and upon everyone that is lifted up, and he shall be brought low. How is God going to accomplish this? This article asks. What are the means He is going to use? God is going to bring upon man the most terrifying and nerve-shattering circumstances to bring man to his knees. God is going to shake man into a realization of his sins and transgressions. There can be no more terrifying experiences than a killer quake, striking suddenly, without warning, in the still of the night. Imagine awakening suddenly amid a bedlam of crashing glass and falling debris. The floor of your home or apartment pitching and bucking like a ship in a wild storm. Wall and ceilings collapse. Fractured water mains erupt in watery geysers in the streets, spewing gas from ruptured gas lines, ignited by 1,000,000 pilot lights, spew fire into the tendered wreckage. Power lines crash in a shower of the words here are L-E-T space H-A, lethal. There's 2 spaces in between those letters. Power lines crash in a shower of lethal sparks upon crumbling homes and helpless, panic-stricken people. Imagine groping in the chaotic darkness and tangled wreckage for your loved ones and family. when our seemingly solid world collapses around us in the possessions and babbles for entertainment we've gathered around us that have kept us too occupied to seek our God and serve Him, those things will seem unimportant and worthless. Notice now verse 17. And the loftiness of man shall be brought low, and the haughtiness of men shall be made low, and the eternal alone shall be exalted in that day, and the idols he shall utterly abolish, and they shall go into the holes of the rock, and into the caves of the earth. All right, there's a space in the word, and I'm trying to make it out. Into the caves of the earth. For fear, that should be for fear of the eternal, and for the glory of his majesty, when he arises to shake terribly the earth. In that day man shall cast his idols of silver and his idols of gold, which they've made, each one for himself to worship, to the moles and to the bats, to go into the clefts of the rocks and into the wraps of the rugged rocks, for the fear of the Lord, and for the glory of his majesty, when he arises to shake terribly the earth. Isaiah 2, verses 17 through 21. So this was from Isaiah 2. Mankind is not heeding God's warning, booming around the world. So God is going to employ the most awe-inspiring, horrifying circumstances to jar mankind into reality. God is going to bring imagination-defying earthquakes around the world to make mankind turn from his rebellious ways. Yes, man is going to forsake his cities that have been utterly destroyed, made rubble by the terrible hand of the Creator God in that day. Men will run into the open fields. You know, a lot of what happened in Mexico yesterday was reported. The people, they run out into the streets. And just as being quoted from Isaiah 2, you know, people get out of the buildings that are crumbling and falling and collapsing in around them and on top of them. And let's go on back to this. Yes, man is going to forsake his cities that have been utterly destroyed, made rubble by the terrible hand of the Creator God in that day. Men will run into the open fields and out into the mountains, seeking to escape the terrible shaking wrath of the Creator God, brought down upon mankind through terrible, devastating earthquakes. Next section is entitled, Earthquakes a Sign. When Jesus Christ was asked, tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Jesus Christ said that among many other terrible and destructive circumstances, earthquakes would occur in many places. Matthew 24, verse 7. Jesus Christ promised that together with Jesus Christ promised that together with famines and pestilences, earthquakes will be one of the signs immediately preceding his imminent return. Christ told his disciples, now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and puts forth his leaves, you know that summer is nigh. So likewise, when you shall see all these things, and he was in that chapter explaining in plain language the seals. He was explaining the seals from the book of Revelation, and only the first 4 of those seals are active now. And then when you see those 4 seals bloom like a blossom, like a bud, a little bud blossoming on a tree limb, when you see all these things blooming and blossoming, know that it is near, even at the door. What's near? He's talking about in other places. He says the kingdom of God is near, and before the kingdom of God can come, we have to go through the 5th, the 6th, and into the 7th seal, because Christ returns and ushers in and restores God's kingdom upon the 7th trump of the 7th seal. And before the 7th seal can blow its 7 trumpets, the fifth seal has to go through 2.5 years, the first 2.5 years of the Great Tribulation. Then the sixth seal, the signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars kick off, astro signs that tell us we are now about to enter the year-long day of the Lord, seventh seal, that completes 3.5 years since the beginning of since the time the Great Tribulation begins, for those fifth, sixth, and seventh seals, with Christ returning on the seventh trump in the seventh seal, and bringing with him, the angel bringing with him, the 7 vials of the 7 last plagues that he's going to pour out, that is part of this day of the Lord, year-long day of the Lord, that is being explained in this article, or being elucidated, talked about in this article. Our major news sources and current scientific journals, we're back to the article now, tell us that earthquakes, our major news sources, current scientific journals, tell us that earthquakes are increasing in frequency and in magnitude. You know, that's telling us that things Christ prophesied to watch for before the fifth seal opens, before the Great Tribulation begins, are increasing in frequency and in magnitude, and that's exactly what he told us to watch for. Earthquakes of a magnitude never before recorded on Earth by man are now occurring. Witness the devastation in 1960. These are signs of the times. As we approach the end of this age, earthquakes are going to grow increasingly greater and more frequently and more frequent in occurrence. Great earthquakes in heavily populated areas will begin to occur. Man is going to be shaken and terrified until he is snapped into reality, into realizing he has transgressed against the Creator God. You know, if you can come to that understanding now, and if I'm speaking to brethren, if I'm speaking to some of you who never heard it before, one of the things we mention often, both on Sabbath.tv here, well, I meant to put our lower third up on the screen. Let me see if I can get back to my shot and put that lower third back up here. One of the things we mention here on Sabbath.tv and on World Watch TV, Sunday through Thursday night, is a verse from Luke 21:36, quoting Christ saying, therefore, because these troubles he's talking about will come, as he says in verse 35 of Luke 21, they come as a snare upon all them that dwell upon the face of the whole earth. Or, you know, on everyone, in other words. It comes like a surprise, like a thief in the night, like a mousetrap going off on a little rat. It comes, boom, just out of nowhere, as if it were. And yet the stage is being set for it, and people will be caught off guard, largely. And Christ says, therefore, because it comes like that, because it comes like a snare upon all them that dwell upon the face of the world, because it comes like a thief in the night, because it comes like a sudden, stark surprise, he says, therefore watch. Watch what? Watch the 4 seals. Because when they increase in frequency and increase in intensity, the seals of number 1, depicted in Revelation by a white horse, which with Christ explaining it in plain language, saying, many will come in my name, saying that I'm the Christ, and yet they'll deceive many. He says, don't be deceived by them. That's the first seal. The second seal depicted in Revelation by a red horse, and Christ explaining that in plain language as war and rumors of war, world war, kingdom against kingdom, nation against kingdom, and the uniting of Europe. The third seal depicted in the book of Revelation by a black horse, Christ described with a word limus, meaning famine or scarcity of food. The fourth seal depicted in the book of Revelation by a pale horse with a rider on that horse named Death, alongside whom it's pictured with Hades, hell, the grave, riding alongside it. And Jesus Christ describing that deadly horse in 3 different terms. One, loimus, meaning, and this is the primary thing, meaning disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt, but also Christ mentioning at this same timing of the fourth seal, well, the Greek word seismos, for seismic activity, commotions in the air, gale force winds of all kinds, typhoons, tornadoes, or hurricanes, etc., and commotions on the ground. And it gives the example in the Greek-English lexicons of earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, wildfires, floods, anything of a seismic nature in the air, on the ground. Let's go back to the article here. Great earthquakes in populated areas will begin to occur. Man's going to be shaken into realizing he has transgressed against the Creator God. Hopefully you can learn that now and be doing, I just come out for just another moment. What I was trying to say about Luke 21:36, the latter part of Luke 21:36 says, if you'll watch, because this thing is coming like a snare, don't get caught off guard, and pray always. So watch and pray always, because this thing's coming like a snare. But if you do those two prerequisites, God holds out a carrot and says, look, if you do those things, you can be accounted worthy to escape. You got to do Luke 4:4, Matthew 4:4, and Luke 21:34 also. You got to live by every word of God and take heed that you don't become caught up in gluttony or drunkenness or surfeiting, gluttony or drunkenness or the cares of this world. Don't become overcharged with that, Christ warned in verse 34. And that relates back to Luke 4:4, live by every word of God. But then if you want to escape, you got to be sure you're watching and praying always, that you can be accounted worthy to escape these things that are going to happen, the fifth, sixth, seventh seal, and be able to stand before the Son of Man. Otherwise, you're left behind, considered by God as lukewarm if you're not following all the instruction of Jesus Christ, including verse 36 of Luke 21. You've got to do the watching, even though some ministers will tell you, nah, we don't need to do that. Shocking to hear some who are supposed to be your instructors denying the very words of Jesus Christ. Again, as recorded in verse 36, Luke 21. Look them up with your own eyeballs. Let's go back to this. The return of Jesus Christ, all these events, the events mentioned in the seven seals, especially the first four that tell us the Great Tribulation is coming, then we go through 2.5 years of that, then the heavenly signs, then the sealing of 144,000, half hour of silence in heaven, then that ghastly seventh seal opens up, pouring out the wrath of God upon mankind, and the seventh seal consisting of 7 trumpets, 4 trumpets of winds, last 3 trumpets of 3 woes, and that third woe, the 7th trump, Christ returns, pours out the 7 last plagues. All these events will culminate in the return of Jesus Christ to this earth, on that 7th trump of the 7th seal. Let's understand what is to occur. Let's stay with this article on this. Notice Zechariah 14. Behold, the day of the Lord comes. That's the 7th seal, year-long day of the Lord. And thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of you. Verse 1. Now continuing in verse 4, Zechariah 14. And his feet shall stand in that day. In that day his feet shall stand upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west. And there shall be a great valley. And half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it toward the south. And you shall flee to the valley of the mountains. Yea, you shall flee like as you fled before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Jesus Christ is returning to this earth to plant his feet upon the Mount of Olives. In that day, there will be a tremendous earthquake in which the whole face of the land will be changed. Mountains will be moved out of their places. New valleys and rivers will be created. Jesus Christ will be king over all the earth in that day. Verse 9. That same day is mentioned in Revelation 16. The time setting is the return of Jesus Christ to this earth. And the seventh angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven, saying, from the throne, saying, it is done. Now this seventh angel is describing the seventh trumpet of the seventh seal. And that seventh trumpet is the same as the third woe, the pouring out of the seven last plagues. And at the start of that seventh trump, on that trump, Christ returns. So again, as this article points out, that seventh trump of the seventh seal, this time setting is the return of Jesus Christ to this earth, and the seventh angel, the angel of the seventh trump, poured out his vial into the air. Now he's got 7 vials. He poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne saying, it is done. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such as was not since men were upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake and so great. Now that great earthquake is part of the seventh trumpet and the pouring out of the 7 last plagues. Verses 17 and 18 of Revelation 16. The whole face of the earth. Let me check myself real quickly here, make sure, because our text got ahead of us, and I think, has gone on by us, and I think verses 17 and 18 that are being referenced here are from chapter 16. Yep, chapter 16 of Revelation. Let's go back to the article. We're at that paragraph at the bottom. The whole face of the earth is going to be changed by this cataclysmic earthquake. And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. Verse 20. The return of Jesus Christ is going to be highlighted by the most cataclysmic earthquake that has ever struck this earth. It will defy the imagination. I'm sorry about some of the misspelled words in our text here, but I have to stop and figure them out here at times. But the return of Jesus Christ is going to be highlighted by the most cataclysmic earthquake that has ever struck this earth. It will defy the imagination. Every fault system and every crack on the face of the earth will come into full play when Jesus Christ descends to shake terribly this earth. Tremendous tidal waves. Not only will the earth itself writhe under the cataclysmic convulsions of this tremendous earthquake, but also the very oceans and seas will erupt in tremendous seismic waves to devastate huge portions of this earth. Notice Jesus Christ's words. Now we're speaking of when Christ returns, the 7th trump, and the pouring out of the 7 last plagues, and this greatest ever earthquake that comes at the time of the 7th trumpet in the 7th seal, during the 7th seal. Notice Jesus Christ's words in Luke 21. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe! Excuse me, brother, I had cut off my mic while my throat got sore. I had to cough for a moment. Let me just take a little sip of water. But it goes on. Let's start this paragraph again. Notice Jesus Christ's words in Luke 21. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. All things that are written may be fulfilled. That's not going to conclude until that 7th seal. I'm picking up from right there. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days, for there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. Now that's speaking of the 7th trump during the 7th seal. We go through 2.5 years of great tribulation before that. For those of you that are accounted worthy to escape the 5th seal, the 6th seal, the 7th seal, by doing what Christ said and by living by every word, and every word includes the two prerequisites in verse 36 of Luke 21. We're in Luke 21 right now in this article, where Christ said, watch and pray always so that you can be accounted worthy to escape. What's going to happen next? Watch the first four active seals so you can escape the fifth, sixth, and seventh seals. And you'll be taken. Now, your children will probably be taken. Those of you who are accounted worthy to escape, you kids better be praying for your parents, because whether you get to go to the place of protection, nourishment, final training or not may depend upon you having at least one parent who is faithful to God, extremely faithful, hot, very faithful to God, obeying Christ's instruction in Luke 21:36 to watch and pray always. Help your parents do that. Encourage them to, because if they're accounted worthy to escape, 1 Corinthians 7 tells us you probably go with them. If they don't, you stay home with them and face the great tribulation, and which will be a time of great martyrdom. A time when the Laodicean era of martyrdom begins. All right, I'm going to grab a sip of water and we'll go back to the chart in just a moment. Excuse me. All right, let's go back to that not chart but article. But now this I'm pointing that out because if you have a small child at the beginning of the Great Tribulation and you're taken to the place of nourishment, final training, you might do all right with that small child, if you get, but it is a time of trouble, and we're told to pray that our escape be not, it is a time of trouble such that we're instructed to pray that our escape be not in the winter nor on the Sabbath. Now, if we're allowed to escape on modern jet aircraft symbolizing two wings of a great eagle, if that's, if that's symbolism, great eagle, Jonah was swallowed up by a great fish. That was not a man-made submarine, by the way. That was a great fish made by God. So God's got options. He can either be using great eagle as a symbol. Revelation has a lot of symbolism in it, so quite possible we're going to fly by modern jet aircraft. You could take along a young kid. But when we get to this point mentioned here in Revelation 16, talking about the seventh trump of the seventh seal, unless you're already in a place of protection at that point, God is saying here, woe unto them that are with child and to them that give suck in those days, for there shall be great distress in the land and wrath upon this people, even God's wrath being poured out, in addition to Satan's wrath in the Great Tribulation being poured out. And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars. Now that's the sixth seal, the signs in the sun and the moon and the stars. And that's telling us, that sixth seal, I wish I had my chart I could pop up on the screen, but I don't have it preloaded over here. I got the hymns we sang and this map of the earthquake from yesterday in Mexico, in Oaxaca, the state of Oaxaca, in Mexico. But that sixth seal is being described here as the heavenly signs, the astro sign and the signs in the sun, the moon, the stars, spoken of in Joel 2. They are the timing point. They occur, that sixth seal occurs 2.5 years into the Great Tribulation, 2.5 years into the fifth seal, to tell us that we're about to enter the year-long day of the Lord. We're about to enter the last year of 3.5 years of the worst time of trouble that ever came upon the face of the earth. And that last year culminating it as God adds the pouring out of his wrath in the first 4 trumpets of 4 winds, the last 3 trumpets of 3 woes, and that last woe, the third woe, being those 7 last plagues. But right at this point in the article, we're talking about the sixth seal at the 2.5 year point into the Great Tribulation, just before just before the year-long day of God pouring out his wrath and the day of the Lord occurs. That's what's being described here with the signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars. And upon the earth, distress of nations, because once those heavenly signs in the sun, the moon, the stars are given, then the seventh seal, the time of God's wrath being poured out on the earth. And as the article here points out, and upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, the seas and the waves roaring, the first four trumpets blowing and doing these things to the earth, men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. That's a typo there. Those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Luke 21, verses 22, 23, 25, and 26. Yes, these are the terrible and awe-inspiring times spoken of by Jesus Christ to soon come upon this earth. Earthquakes to grow worse. Jesus Christ warned us that we would know of his impending return by the things he outlined to come to pass. With each passing day, our major newspapers and our news magazines worldwide tell us of increasing famine, pestilence among cattle and crops, of increasing rumors of war, and of the accelerated occurrence of earthquakes worldwide. These are signs of the times. As we hurtle down toward the grand smash climax of this age, these means that God has chosen to shake man from his lethargy are going to increase in violence and scope. Around the world, whole nations have experienced earthquakes of a magnitude unprecedented in the history of man on this earth. Yet, these are to grow worse. Scientists aware of what's ahead. Investigation into the earthquake fault lines of this earth has introduced into geologist thinking an entirely new scope of destructive potential. Unless we have God's protection, unless we know in advance about these things and are preparing for them, we will have to go through them. But notice Jesus' warning to his people. Watch you therefore. And because these things come as a, verse 35 says, they come as a snare, as a surprise, a sudden attack, a sudden thing upon the whole world, so that all that dwell upon the face of the whole earth, everyone is caught off guard by it. Watch therefore, because you don't want to be caught off guard. Watch and pray always that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man. All these things that shall come to pass are the fifth, the sixth, the seventh seal. The Great Tribulation, the astral signs telling us we're 2.5 years into the Great Tribulation, and now the seventh seal, year-long day of the Lord, and pouring out of God's wrath. You can escape it. God, our protector. God promises deliverance and protection to his people if you obey him fully, and if you're obeying verse 36 of Luke 21. God will not bring these things upon those who obey him and trust in him. Notice his promise in Psalm 91. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High, he that's obeying and keeping the commandments of the Almighty God. That's what it means by dwelling in the secret place of the Most High. He that is obeying everything Christ and the Father said, and keeping the commandments of Almighty God. Keeping the commandments is not enough, though. There's more to obeying God than just keeping the commandments. You got to live by every word, including the two prerequisites of Luke 21:36, if you want to escape. But those who do that shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. Surely he shall deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the awesome pestilence. You shall not be afraid of the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day, nor for the pestilence that walks in darkness, nor for the destruction that waste at noonday. 1,000 shall fall at your side, and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not come near you, because you, if you've made the eternal, which is for a refuge, even the Most High, your habitation. Then shall no evil befall you, neither shall any plague come near your dwelling. For he shall give his angels charge over you, to keep you in all your ways. Sometime in the future, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps next week or next year, when a sudden eerie silence falls over your town, your city, and then from deep within the bowels of the earth comes an ominous rumbling, and your familiar world begins to sway and teeter and dissolve in chaotic destruction, will you have God's protection? Our only hope lies in obedience to the Creator God and to His Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. What a dreadful fate it will be to be His enemy when He shakes terribly the earth. All right, and again, that article I just read to you is from 1961, but the principles, the prophecies, especially those prophecies from Luke 21, Revelation 16, all apply very, very, very much to us today, friends. All right. I'm going to end it right there. That's it for this AM Sabbath service to the United States, PM to the United Kingdom. Just a reminder that, again, our date today on the Hebrew calendar, God's sacred calendar, is the second day of the 12th month. There's no 13th month this year. We're not in a leap year. So the first month, the beginning of the year, will come in less than a month now. We're at the second day of the 12th month, the first month that begins a new year on God's sacred calendar begins in less than a month. Then 14 days into that first month on the new year, right after sunset on the 14th of the first month, will be the Passover memorial commemorative. Short, right after sunset, on the 14th of the first month. So we're less than 6 months, we are less than 6 months, but we're also less than 6 weeks away from the next feast day, the most solemn feast day of the entire year. God's holy, sacred Passover. It is holy. It sets us apart as God's distinctive, but it's not a holy day. You don't have to not work, and it's not a holy day, but it is the most solemn feast commemorative thing we do, the evening part of the 14th, right after sunset, as the 14th day of the first month begins. All right, brethren, as I said, that's it for today. I'm going to sign us off. God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll plan to be back here on Sabbath.tv next Friday night with the Bible study, then next Sabbath with the services, the Sabbath service, and then the next time I'll be back on a live stream will be, God willing, Sunday night on worldwatch.tv with the day's current news that we're supposed to be watching and praying about, that we provide you on Worldwatch TV as a help to just, for those of you that work, come home tired, we spend the day searching through the news that relates to the seals to make it easy for you to just tune in for an hour, sometimes a little less, and just pick up the day's news that relates to those seals that I've dug from the back pages, the front pages, and just put out on a platter for you to make your job easier. I can't do your prayers for you, but we can lay the daily news out for you as we do on worldwatch.tv. Hope you'll join us for that Sunday through Thursday night on worldwatch.tv. It's on the World Watch TV page, also on Facebook Live a lot of times. We'll probably keep that up for a little while on Facebook Live. That seems to be a good medium. But let me wish you a good rest of the day. Hope you can get some good fellowship with brethren in, some good study, some good prayer. Draw closer to God and prepare your mind to obey God. Even if you've failed, God's ready to hear you say, God, I'm sorry. Forgive me and help me. Give me your Spirit and help me close the doors to where I find myself weak. Don't go those places where you're weak. Don't let yourself get overly tired where your willpower is off. When you see yourself first getting tired, go pray and get some rest and sleep. And set your mind during prayer that you're not going to sin and ask God to help you with that. He's ready and willing to give you the help if you will ask for it and accept it. He, as he says in 2 Peter 3 verse 9, we were talking about a little bit last night, it's his will that not any perish. And with that being his will, he wants to help you. And if you don't receive the help after he's called you, he spanks those sons he loves. And if you don't correct yourself, well, watch out, because God's going to correct you. But his correction is loving. It's punishment, but it's designed to help you want to repent. It may make you cry out to him for the things you have to suffer until you get the point. Oh, is there something you want me to change in my life? Is there some attitude I have that's not quite following you? Do I have all these ideas of my own? Am I fighting you, God? Am I fighting your word? Yeah, some of us are. Some of us have been. I'm including myself in there. But sometimes I have to say it like this. Some of you are. You includes me too, brethren. So, but where you are, you want to change it. You don't want to be left behind to suffer all this stuff we talked about in this article that is based on the seals that we're watching and praying about. Things, punishments that are coming upon man, that once these first four blossom, we can escape that fifth one, the things that are going to happen next. And hope you'll be encouraged to be in that position. All right, brethren, happy rest of the Sabbath. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreath, your host here today, saying, see you next time.